This is the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Kendall of the notaballerina.com travel blog. Every episode I'll share travel tales from several fellow travel lovers, and together we hope to entertain and inspire you, remind you of some of your own great travel experiences, and encourage you to hit the road again soon. Hello and welcome to episode 96 of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Today we're talking about remote travel in Africa. I have a couple of really great guests talking about some of their really fabulous experiences of remote travel in Africa. I have to admit I have not had a really properly remote experience in Africa. In fact, I haven't seen much of Africa at all yet. It's a big gaping hole in my travel experience. I've had a week in Egypt and a couple of weeks backpacking around Tunisia. I do mention the Tunisia bit sometime in today's episode because I chat with Anna about her experience in the Sahara, and I did get to have a little taste of that. But in fact, I'm still after, it must be getting on towards 15 years, I think. I'm still very bitter about a nearly experience I had in Africa. I had planned this amazing trip which included some good proper remote camping travel with a small group in Namibia. I'm obsessed with Namibia because, you know, if you've seen the photos, Namibia is amazing. And I was meant to take this trip with my then boyfriend. It was during the time that I was living and working in Europe. And I'd organised all of it. It sounded amazing. I was obsessively reading and looking at photos of Namibia. And then got to this kind of crunch time where I didn't want to return to Australia, which was what was happening after that trip. It was kind of on the way from Europe to Australia. We were stopping off for this trip in Africa. And I didn't really want to be with that boyfriend anymore. I'm not sure which feeling came first, actually. But in any case, they sort of combined together, and I had to give up that trip to Namibia, and I've been bitter about that ever since because it would have been amazing. So one day I will get there, and in the meantime I'll just listen to my lovely guests who've experienced amazing African trips and live vicariously through them instead. Another way to live vicariously is perhaps through today's sponsor. So thank you very much to today's sponsor, which is, again, the travel writer Alistair McGuinness, who sponsored last week's episode as well. Thank you, Alistair. So he has a strong sense of adventure and has done his fair share of remote travel too. In fact, in June 2018, so in just a week or two, if you're listening live to this podcast, he will be releasing his third book in his Half a World Away series, and that's titled Half a World Away in Africa, Kilimanjaro to Cape Town on an Overland Truck. So I think that fits very nicely with today's episode, and I'm sure it will be an excellent read. So similarly to me, Alistair describes himself as adventurous but not an adventure junkie, which I think he also has in common with this episode's guests. In fact, my first guest, Linda, and I talk about precisely that topic, so it fits in nicely. In any case, Alistair's book catalogue includes tales of travels in South America, Europe, Australia, and of course Africa. And he has a kind of a joyfully quirky style, which some reviewers have, and I think rightly, compared to Bill Bryson's style. So you can find his books on Amazon or via his website, alistairmcguinness.com. He's actually offering a free ebook of some of his stories called The Secret Spot to people who join his newsletter. I've had a read through that, and it's lovely. So I'll leave links in the show notes so you can easily find all of that stuff about Alistair. And of course, the show notes will be at notaballerina.com/96 for episode 96. Now, on to my guests. My first guest today is the lovely Linda Schlencker, who has masses of experience taking people into remote parts of Africa and has so much interesting stuff to tell us about it.
Some people love luxury travel and they love resorts, and I guess that's not where my headspace is at all. Mm-hmm. I love something like that at the end of a trip or in the middle of a trip or something, you know, for a night or a couple of days, but to go and spend a week in a resort, buy a pool and read a book, that's really just not me. I just need to be doing something all the time.
I'm exactly the same, yeah. One day here and there is fine, but yeah.
And I guess I've always liked the idea of travel being adventurous, and that doesn't always mean that it's got to be physically difficult, although that's some of the things that I've loved to do is, you know, do a kayaking. I've done a kayaking trip in the Arctic Circle, and that's kind of a a strenuous thing or a physically difficult thing to do because you're kayaking all day. But even just a trip to a place like India or many countries in southern Africa, just culturally, that can be very confronting and very different. You can still be in the lap of luxury in hotels in India, but what you are traveling through every day is very confronting for a lot of people, that kind of poverty. So I guess the difficult travel can be that it's difficult emotionally or culturally, or it's just difficult because the terrain's difficult. And I guess that's more of where we get into, is getting into remote areas where there isn't any public transport, there aren't any roads, there's no trains, other than if you got flown into some of these places in a small aircraft. There's no other way to get in there than to walk into there or drive a 4x4 on a track. And along what the benefits of that are is when you get there, there's nobody there, so you have it all to yourself, and that's a really difficult thing to find on the planet these days, just getting away from people and having it to yourself. And that's what I love about remote travel, is that you get that space and you get into the wilderness and you really can just relax and listen to nature and not have, tons of other people around making noise. And not that, in a campsite, not like the people are playing music or anything, but it still is a noisy, not a natural environment. And along to do that, though, you have to be prepared to camp, put up your own tent, go to the toilet in the bush, dig a hole, all of those sorts of things, go without a shower for a day or two. And some people just seem to be, no, I'm not going to do that. If there's no shower, if there's no, if I don't have an ensuite, I'm not going. And I always just think, wow, you're just really restricting the beauty that you can get to and the remoteness that you can get to and wilderness that you can get to that still does exist out there if you're prepared to put in the hard yards.
Do you think it's just because people haven't had an experience like that and they don't really, they don't appreciate the benefits and they don't really realise that the downsides are not as bad as they're imagining, or?
I think that's probably true. I think if you never grew up doing any sort of camping or even, hiking and staying in huts, which is a lot more basic kind of travel, you just have all these questions of, well, like, how do you go to the toilet? You've never had to just go and dig a hole in the bush and do that. You sort of just don't understand. And like in a place like Namibia, where it's a desert and a lot of it's a very vast desert with not a lot of trees, you're basically pulling up with a bunch of cars, and it's not like there's a rock or a tree or anything you can
no
go behind. You just kind of have to spread the cars out and use the car. But I think that those sorts of things really do. I don't understand why people are so afraid of that, because it's such a natural thing to do. It's only our modern world where we have flushing toilets and that sort of thing. It's a natural thing for
Everybody
humans to do.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think it is just that they haven't done it before, and some people will probably actually really love it if they did it, but they are intimidated by it, I guess.
Yeah. Well, so do you ever have people on the tours that you guide who have, do they actually have difficulties dealing with it once they're out there, or do they always just kind of go with the flow?
Well, most of the people that would travel with us, because they know what we're doing in Southern Africa is a camping-based one, we wouldn't take people who
were reluctant.
Yeah, who hadn't been camping before, because it's a multi-day, out of 30 nights, it's 25 nights where you're camping.
Right.
So you really have to know somebody can do that, or else it could be a disaster for them, and then that affects the whole group.
Yeah.
But you definitely get people where we go in Southern Africa, more the fears are, okay, I'm used to camping and I don't mind going, to the toilet in the bush, but there's lions there.
Yes, now this would be me. I don't mind going to the toilet in the bush, but is there a lion around the corner? That's the bit that would freak me out.
and it is, and that's probably the biggest one of the biggest questions we get on the trips is, well, how does that work? What do you do? Because most of the campsites in a place like Botswana are unfenced, so definitely the game is going to walk through there, especially during the night. And so I guess we take a lot of precautions. We found these amazing little things that we bought in Australia called a magic toilet. It's like a little pop-up toilet that you can actually have in the tent. and you put little crystal. It's got like you pop it up, comes up about 20 centimeters or so off the ground. Just looks like a little toilet seat. You put a little biodegradable bag in it. It's got these crystals that you throw in. If you wee in it, it just turns to gel, and you tie it up, and then you can just go and bury it the next day in the daylight when you can actually see what's around.
Yeah.
So those are great because people can just have those in their tent. So if they really need to go, they know that they can go without getting out of the tent.
That's excellent. Yes, that makes me feel better already.
And some of the 4x4s that we have got these great little camper units on the back. So you actually sleep inside and you can get changed inside and that sort of thing. So some people are using those. Other people, my husband and I, are usually just in a ground tent on the ground. And that's another thing I think people don't realize about wildlife is they think really it's safe to sleep on the ground in a tent, which is quite logical, right? Because a lion, it's definitely capable of getting into a tent. It's just going to scratch the side. But they don't get that's something that they can get into. As long as it's closed, they don't try to get in.
So you've never had any kind of scary incidents over the years?
No, you'll have, hyenas are one of those things that get quite cheeky and come into camp, and they're scary-looking things, and they could bite through your thigh with one chomp. They're very strong,
right? But
they're also quite fraidy cat. If you're an adult, like the adults running and shouting at them or something, usually would scare them away.
Okay,
but they do come in a lot looking for, bones and leftover whatever, and they can smell all the blood from meat that you're cooking on the fire and things at night. So we have had them, you'll have them like sniffing around right outside your tent. Like you can hear them sniffing and sometimes even kind of digging underneath your tent because maybe someone cooked over that spot the night before. But they, you just kind of bang on the side of the tent and they run away.
Right, okay.
Yeah, and I guess the other thing too is that if you think about how the heightened sense of smell that animals in the bush have, we must actually smell pretty foul to them because we put all this chemicals in our hair and we use deodorants and soaps and even when we're washing up we're using detergent. None of that really, I would think, would smell very appetizing.
No, it's not very natural, is it?
No, so we're not, and there's so much food around, we're not really, number one food source. There's plenty of other pickings for them to take. So,
right.
Having said that, animals are opportunistic, and if there was something easy to kill, they would do it. If you stumbled into a lion, it might well go, okay, chomp
yum.
Yeah, but you don't really hear of that happening.
No, you don't. That would be a headline. Yes, that would be headline news. So, yeah. So it's more the thought of it that's an issue than the actual reality. As long as you're sensible. Yeah,
and even with something that is not like a carnivore, like an elephant, it's still huge, and they can be aggressive if they're in a breeding herd or if you annoy them. Mm-hmm. But in general, they're just walking through campsites because they're foraging, or you're quite often camped under one of the trees that have these pods on them, and they like to shake the trees, and the pods fall down, and they pick those up.
Right.
So you just keep out of their way. You don't approach them. You can be sitting in a chair, and they might come closer and closer and closer to you and walk straight by you, but they know that you're there, and it is amazing. As soon as people get into that environment, you can have a sense that you're not in danger. You're still excited, it's still thrilling, but you don't sit there and think, yeah, wow, it's going to come and get me. You kind of more get into the moment and go, wow, it is like right there.
Right.
and you just be quiet, and you can even talk a little bit, because they don't have the best eyesight. So if you're there, you don't want to startle them. So if you kind of see one coming, you might just start saying, hey guy, I'm here. How are you? Just so they kind
early
of
warning system.
They hadn't seen you. Okay, well, there's actually someone there, and not startle them.
Okay. Wow.
But it really is great. Like people who are really anxious about it before they go, afterwards they are just so thrilled that they've done it. They just have enjoyed every second of it once they get there.
Chatting with Linda definitely made me reignite my dreams of doing some good travel in Africa. I might need to wait probably just a couple of years until my son is just a bit older and can really enjoy it too. And I think that we would love to get out there and see what there is. I would be terrified if I heard any wild animal, dangerous or not, sniffing around outside my tent. But I guess armed with some information and some reassurances from someone like Linda, I would probably survive. Fingers crossed. I would be terrified. But the rest of it, and especially that getting away to somewhere where there's nobody else around, beautiful. I love it. Now, my next guest today is Anna Kwiecinska, who is talking about her long-standing desire to be in the Sahara Desert. I love what she dreamt up for herself and how she achieved this fairly recently in Morocco.
So I'm very prone to sort of visual fantasies, and I remember one of the girls that came with me to India many years ago. She said to me, we were in Udaipur and there was this beautiful palace, and straight away I said to her, look, I can see sort of poochie dress and sort of 60s hoop earrings and so on. And she said, I love the way when you see something, you imagine what you're wearing when you're in this idyll that you create. So for me, the sheltering sky, again, Paul Bowles, has been, it's been most unrequited invention of my fantasy, if you like, seeing myself in the desert and in robes and with people who are in robes where you just see their eyes, and being in a situation where it's not necessarily easy. I'm definitely not always asked for an easy situation when I'm traveling. In fact, I generally think if it was easy, everybody would be doing it. And yes, I kind of like to do things that at least not everybody's doing.
Yes.
So I have to say that for the first week, I'd headed down to the desert, having nurtured this ambition for the Sahara food again since I was 35 or something. I so wanted to be Deborah Winger for most of my life. And this wonderful man listened very carefully to all of my aspirations, and then he looked at me and he said to me, but Anna, the thing is, there are no red sandhills where you're pointing on the map. And I was immediately crestfallen. And he said, and then he moved his finger somewhat further along and he said, but there are sandhills here. So I said, well, can we go there instead? Yes, he said. But he said, it's getting very hot, and although you may not need a lot of shade, although I think you will, camels definitely do.
Right.
And we can't send camels out for 2 weeks in this heat now. Nobody will enjoy it, let alone possibly survive. Mm-hmm. So that would be very reckless and foolhardy. So not on his watch. So he said, why not go for a week with the camel into this area and then come back to me here in town, and if you have enjoyed yourself and you still want to do what you originally had planned, we could take off and do that with a jeep. Right. And still make that journey from oasis to oasis. It was from the easternmost port in the southern Sahara to the central one, so from Merzouga to Zagora, and then the third one would be closer to the Atlantic coast. And these marked out the three great historic entry points from the bigger Sahara into that northwest corner of Morocco. Right. So my ambition was to travel from one to the other. And eventually we did that, but we did that over 7 days with the jeep, because indeed it was searingly hot.
Right.
And
this local man knew well what he was saying.
No, I would trust him truly with my life. And in fact, you do trust them with your life. This is the thing. If I'd been out... No, I mean, really, it would be very easy to just dehydrate over the course of an afternoon, I should think.
I imagine so, absolutely.
And when it's
easy enough here in Australia, and I think out in the Sahara it's equally or more difficult.
When those fierce desert winds blow up, and even the camels don't want to go nose long into the sandstorm, I mean, things just get covered up very, very quickly. You can see between season and season how desert camps that are set up for tourists have become completely sanded over during the off-season.
Right, wow.
Yeah, they're almost submerged.
Yeah.
So you can disappear quickly.
That sounds terrifying.
Which I suppose is why in The English Patient, he placed her in a cave.
Yes, that's true.
Rather than left her out.
That was actually very wise.
Yes.
Oh my goodness! So you did have a week with the camel.
I had a week with the camel and then a week with the jeep. And look, some people say that 40 minutes on the back of a camel is enough for a lifetime, but I swear, as on my last day coming back from the desert into the town, I was just I was weeping. Oh. I was weeping underneath all my scarves.
All covers, yes.
I just couldn't believe it was over. I felt that I had only just started to get the hang of it.
Yes.
I just wanted to do the whole thing.
Yes.
And I'm sure next winter, I'm sure I will.
Maybe you will. Yes. Well, that's beautiful. Isn't it wonderful when an idea like that comes to reality and it's as good as you expected or even more
and
amazing.
It leaves you wanting more.
Yes.
Because there are lots of things once we have tried them, we'll think, well, okay, that was interesting, but I don't necessarily need kind of tick. And again, but I've always said I want to do everything twice, once and then have time to do it again because I'm a bit of a glutton.
Yes, no, I appreciate that. I think I feel a bit the same. That sounds amazing. I did have just a day on a camel in Sahara in Tunisia, and I did love it, and I could easily have kept going.
Absolutely.
So, it was.
Absolutely.
I don't know. I mean, there's nothing, but it's beautiful nothing around there, and it's just rhythmic and. I don't know. I really, really enjoyed that day.
And the nothingness is actually full of things.
Yes.
Because you realise that desert sand is anything but desert sand. It changes colour according to the geology. Suddenly you'll be walking, nothing suddenly happens on a camel, so slowly you find yourself walking along an ancient riverbed, and there are the shape of the pebbles have changed, and then you'll start to find tiny little fossils, and so I found myself becoming very fascinated in what was actually underfoot, and the improbability of finding a woman walking from apparently nowhere to nowhere else with a great heavy load on her back and looking as old and wizened as time itself. And my heart breaking and giving her what was clearly a lot of money by her standards.
Wow.
And her just sort of not knowing what on earth that was all about. There was something very odd about me, but I just thought, I want you to put your load down and not that I make a big habit of handing out money everywhere, but it just seemed the only way I could somehow, honour this life that she'd had of
that would
tremendous hardship.
Yes, exactly, an enormously difficult.
It'd be like me winning the lottery.
Yes. Oh, how gorgeous! When Anna was talking about the nothingness of the not nothingness, what looks like nothing in the Sahara, which is actually very detailed, and then we talked about the rhythm of the camel. It just made me think of being on long-term train trips as well, like when I travelled across Russia on the Trans-Siberian train. There's something about being out in the middle of nowhere and watching things that look the same passing you by, but then discovering that they're all very different. I just love that. I don't know, it's a very meditative kind of travel, so I definitely would love to get out there and do something like that, like Anna did as well. I just had, as I said earlier, a day on a camel out in the Sahara, and it was beautiful. And there was just a couple of us on that trip, and there was lots of moments where you could just look at the whole distance around 360 degrees and see nothing, and I love that. So it's a special situation. I'm also going to leave a link in the show notes to the book that Anna mentioned, The Sheltering Sky by Paul Bowles, because it's interesting how a book can set you up with this image and make you want to travel in some way. I mean, that's the same reason I went on the Trans-Siberian after reading one of Paul Theroux's books about his experience, and then for many, many, many years I was dying to repeat that trip as well. So it's funny how these things happen. Anyway, that's it for our chats about remote travel in Africa. So thank you very much for listening. It's been episode 96 of the Thoughtful Travel podcast, which means you can find show notes at notaballerina.com/96. And the links I'm about to tell you about are all in there if you can't remember them all, which is entirely possible. So, of course, a big thank you again to this episode's sponsor, travel writer Alistair McGuinness. You can find him at alistairmcguinness.com, and I'll leave links to his book pages and stuff as well. Thanks again to Linda from Self Drive Adventures. She's at selfdriveadventures.com. And a big thank you to Anna as well, and she is at annakwicinska.com. And don't forget, of course, come and chat with us about these things in our Facebook group. It's called Thoughtful Travellers. So there's a link in the show notes, or just go to Facebook and type in Thoughtful Travellers into the search bar and you should find us. It's always lots of fun discussions going on in there. If you're on Twitter, find me at Amanda Kendall and use the hashtag ThoughtfulTravelPod. And do get in touch, because I do love to hear from listeners. I love to chat with you in the Facebook group. And thank you very much again for listening. This has been another episode of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Show notes and other information are at notaballerina.com/podcast. Join me again soon for another chat about why we travel. Bye for now.